see their faces. That's right.
That's right. Oh, look, but participants are here. Hi.
Hi.
Good evening.
Good evening. This is our second part of our webinar series on social emotional learning, and it's called Putting on Your Own Oxygen Mask First, Leading with Healing and Well-Being for Ourselves and Others. And this webinar is a continuation of part one, where we really focused on self. This part two is going to focus on your journey as a leader in this work. So I would like to introduce to you Christine Sampson Clark, and she has been working as a special education teacher in Trenton Public Schools. And she's elected to the National Education Association NEA's Executive Committee on July 19th, and was reelected July 2022 for a 3-year term. Yay. Sampson Clark began her career in education 30 years ago as an educator support professional, and since then has taught in special education programs and alternative education programs, and also provided literacy intervention through Reading Recovery Program. She served 2 3-year terms on NEA Board of Directors. She also served as chair of a number of NEA boards and committees, including the NEA Board's Black Caucus and the NEA Friends of Education Committee. Recognizing the importance of social justice and community activism, Sampson Clark is passionate about her community involvement with the Not in My Neighborhood community advocacy group and the Rising Over Sexual Abuse Warriors. Sampson Clark is dedicated to raising issues on the national agenda that are important to students and NEA members. She can often be found using her social media platform to encourage others to use their voice and advocate for those in need. So welcome, Christine, and thank you for starting us off.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that awesome introduction. I would like to formally begin our meeting with a land acknowledgement, if that's okay with everyone in the room. And as I do my land acknowledgement, please use this time to share in the chat the traditional lands in which you reside as well. We'd love to share in that space as much as possible. We are mindful that around the country, each of us comes together on traditional lands served by Native people. And I would like to take this moment to acknowledge that we all participate on this call. All of us on this call reside, work, and are meeting on the original ancestral homelands served by America's first people. We pay respect to America's first people and all elders, past, present, and emerging. And we are called on to learn and share what we learn about the tribal history, the culture, and contributions that have been suppressed in telling the story of America. Here where I live in the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, I reside on the stolen lands of the Lenni Lenape people. The Lenni Lenape were also referred to as the Delaware Indians in reference to the colonial name for the Delaware River where the tribe existed. During European colonization, the Lenni Lenape were decimated by European diseases, and the survivors were driven west, first by the British and then American expansion. Over 11,000 members of the Lenni Lenape tribes were sent by the US government to live in Oklahoma. However, there are about 5,000 descendants of the Lenni Lenape still residing right here in New Jersey and Pennsylvania today. And we are working with them to help them for sovereignty recognition and the restoration of their cultural identity throughout the region. For more information, please visit www.native-languages.org or www.lenapelifeways.org to learn more about the Lenni Lenape and the work that they are doing today to preserve their culture. And with that, I'm in, and thank you so much for this time.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I see the chat, I think, is disabled. We're working on that, but in case we can't get that fixed, I'm just going to encourage you to maybe take out a piece of paper and instead of using the electric chat, use what we call, I guess, the old school chat, which is your paper and pencil or pen in front of you. So just to start, I'm going to ask our wonderful presenters on the call to just quickly introduce themselves because we have a lot to get through. So I'll just model, we'll say our name, how we're feeling, and our pronouns. So I am Annalise, pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am feeling excited to be with you all. And I'll pass it to Brandy.
I'm Brandy. I work for teacher quality and at the NEA. And what was the question again, Annalise?
Your pronouns and how you're feeling.
Thank you. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm feeling inspired tonight. I hold this work near and dear to my heart.
And I'll ask Katora to go next.
I'm Katora Robbie, she, her, hers, and I am feeling grateful.
Thank you. And I'll ask Chris and then Sarah.
Hi, my name is Chris Thomas. I'm a teacher member from Michigan, so happy to be here. And I'm happy to introduce Sarah.
Thanks, Chris. I'm also a teacher member from Michigan. Chris and I work together, teach together in Michigan, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm feeling uplifted. I love this topic, and I love the work that NEA is doing around this topic. And thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank all of you. So to get us kicked off, we're just going to talk a little bit about our session goals. So firstly, we're going to become a little bit more familiar with the NEA Leadership Competency Framework, if you haven't already heard of it, and specifically the social and emotional intelligence domain. We're going to explore 3 themes in that domain: social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And hopefully you'll walk away with some skills you can use to support yourself, your students, and your colleagues in their healing journey. So before we begin, I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes, take maybe 15 or 20 seconds to think about a great leader in your career or life. And once you have someone in mind, unfortunately, you won't be able to share in the chat, but just maybe even write down what was special, what is or was special about them, and what qualities did you or do you most admire about them. And for me, I will say the 3 qualities that come to mind when I think of the great leaders I've had the chance to serve under. I think of 3 themes, 3 traits that leaders need if they want to really create healing spaces for themselves and their colleagues. And those are autonomy, which is giving individuals the chance to do their work in the way that they feel is best suited for them. Making them feel a sense of belonging, like they're part of a team or a family, and giving them the ability to contribute, and not just any way to contribute, but in a way that really sparks joy for them. Those would be the 3 qualities, I would say, of leaders that I have seen in being able to create healing and well-being spaces for themselves and others. And I will say I've had the privilege of working with 2 leaders, Corey Wofford, who's the Associate Director at the Center for Governance at NEA, and my past Executive Director, Jerry Newberry, who is Executive Director of the Health Information Network. Both very different, but these 3 qualities really stood out. So we're going to be talking a lot about leadership and what is needed to create healing and well-being spaces. And when we talk about leadership, we understand that there is a dominant paradigm of leadership, which is, we'll call them I leaders. This is really how we've thought about leadership in the past. And unfortunately, we've probably all had I leaders. They did not help create conditions for autonomy, belonging, and the ability to contribute. They maybe even created harm inadvertently. And what we're trying to move to is this we leader column. But how we get there is challenging, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Since COVID, we've seen that this old paradigm of I leadership is not effective. And we've seen that with the Great Resignation, with workers claiming their agencies, and with also just multiple crises that are requiring a different kind of leadership than we've ever seen before. And we also see that many leaders unfortunately fail, not from lacking intelligence, not from lacking great talent, and not from resources, but from a lack of emotional intelligence. A great example of this recently was Southwest Airlines. If any of you had the unfortunate pleasure of traveling over the holidays, you might have seen there was a message from the pilots union sharing that there was a huge leadership shortcoming and failure of the airline's outdated scheduling software and unwillingness to listen to ground crew and employees and what they were telling them. And it took, unfortunately, a catastrophic weather event to send the airline into a tailspin where 80% of their flights were canceled. So we see time and time again, it's not resources and people, it's this sometimes lack of emotional intelligence from our leaders themselves. And we see this leadership transformation of going from I to we as necessary and vital. But how do we adapt? How do we help leaders adapt their leadership to what we call a VUCA world, which is a volatile, uncertain, complex, chaotic, and ambiguous world? Well, we do that by helping them create a vision of what's needed, helping them be able to understand what it will take to get there, having the compassion and courage to get there, and then being agile and adaptable along the way. So in thinking about how we support leaders to create spaces of healing and well-being for ourselves and others, we believe that this work starts with you, starts with inner work, and being mindful that as leaders and educators, that means being aware of our own strengths and growth opportunities as leaders. And as leaders, you do not need a title or power in order to be able to do this work. We're going to use the word leader a lot, but I want you to think of leader as being interchangeable with educator. And I want you to imagine yourself in the center, smallest circle of this diagram. Your work is to understand yourself, your strengths, your challenges, your culture, your history. That's where your leadership journey starts. And from there, it's to move to understanding the people and students you work with, understanding their strengths, challenges, culture, and history, and then moving that up to your organization and association and doing the same thing. But how you understand yourself impacts all of these areas and how you lead, and can make the difference in whether or not you are an I leader or a we leader, and can create healing spaces and well-being spaces for those around you. So now I'm just going to show you some quotes, and I'm just going to ask you to maybe find one quote that is coming out to you and just read it and sit with its words. And maybe even think about what resonates with you from this particular quote. And I wish we had more time to really digest this, but there's a lot we're trying to get through. So I'm going to ask you if there's something that resonates with you, that we'll be recording this and to really come back and sit with this. Because I think in doing this work, it's going to take some time to digest all of what's going to be shared with you tonight. So being self-aware, and when we talk about being self-aware, we're talking about being mindful, and we're talking about acting mindfully. As you might remember from part 1 of our webinar, if you were able to attend that, practicing mindfulness has been scientifically proven to improve emotional intelligence. It can help you reason with your emotions to make better decisions. It can help you understand your emotions and develop self-compassion and acceptance. And it can help you regulate and respond appropriately to your emotions. And again, this is the difference between with your prefrontal cortex or your wizard brain, you being able to pause, to reason, to really come from a place of groundedness, or from your lizard brain, your amygdala, which is sort of your reactionary brain. And your emotions really do matter, not just for you, but for everyone, because they can affect your memory, they can affect your physical and mental health, and they can affect your performance and creativity. And if you take anything from this, I hope you'll take that with this dominant paradigm of leadership. It views emotional intelligence as soft skills, but we know that they are more than soft skills. They are hard skills, and they are necessary for our work in life. And as you know, as educators, they're foundational for teaching and learning. So how do we at the NEA, an organization that's the largest labor union in the country, how do we see emotional intelligence? How do we see these skills? Well, what's exciting at the NEA is that we actually have a framework that we've been able to develop that helps define what it means to be a leader. And we have 7 competency domains that help us to understand what are the skills, knowledge, and abilities that all leaders need to have and be able to do in order to be successful. And if you'll notice with this wheel, there's no hierarchy. All of the competencies are connected and necessary. And on the outside layer of the wheel, there's some progression levels that talk about how leading starts. And level 1 is really self, level 2 is leading others, and level 3 is organization. So just note that for this presentation, we're focusing on the center competency, which is social emotional intelligence. But we really feel that's the heart of this wheel and is really important if you want to be able to lead at self. So lastly, before I pass it over to Sarah, I'm just going to say that to chart this new leadership path forward, this framework can help be a guide for you to not only define what you need to know, do, but what mindset you need to have in order to be effective, in order to be able to lead at every level, and in order to be able to create healing and well-being spaces for others. And these competencies are a fundamental paradigm shift from how leadership has been viewed in the association, which is title and power. Instead, we believe you are a leader because of the profession you chose and because of the individuals you stand in front of every day. And this is the culture shift needed in education. This will impact why educators want to stay in the classroom and profession. And we believe this is the future and where we need to go forward. So with that, I'll pass it over to Sarah to take us in more about social awareness.
Thank you. Yes. So talking about social awareness, the first thing that I want to do is kind of explain how to read the competencies so that you know what you're looking at. And if you notice at the top, it points out at level 1, Annalise talked about level 1, level 2, and level 3. You can see those progressions in the competencies, and that gives you an idea of where am I in those competencies. Also, it kind of outlines the behaviors, so you know how this should look or how this does look, and continues on by talking about training or leadership development ideas. So you can ask yourself, how can I grow? And I want to point out that through the 7 competencies, the NEA really highlights and examines looking at this through a race equity lens. We know that that's critical for our students. And so that's something that you'll see throughout the 7 competencies. As Annalise said, today we're going to focus on level 1 and level 2, and specifically perspective, practicing empathy and compassion, taking and disrupting social norms that prevent equitable agency. And we have a link for the NEA competencies, and can you participants, what you can't tell us if you can actually see the chat. So if it would help, we'll go ahead and put that in the Q&A as well, so that if you can look in either one place or the other. And as they've mentioned, go ahead and look at the Q&A if you are wanting to ask questions or participate in the conversation. We do want to hear you. Okay, so moving on to our next slide. When we look at social awareness, we want to talk about how our own awareness forms, and it's within this ecosystem of our own personal context. And if you've ever met an infant or a toddler, you know that awareness starts with the self and our own personal needs, and then we become aware of other people and eventually of our surroundings, and that's all happening in the context of our own personal ecosystem. And that's why each of us has a different perspective. Go ahead. Thank you. In society, we're grouped into different boxes or categories based on a number of identities. And thanks to Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, we now understand how those different identities impact one another and compound structural inequalities. As you think about your leadership and growing your own social awareness, Do you have individuals from different identities than yourself that can help to inform your thinking and learning? And I know that you can't write about this in the chat, but just kind of think about that. If you have a notebook next to you or a sheet of paper, just kind of jot a note, a reflection about how having different identities, or more importantly, how not having different identities from yourself that you can look to and look up to, how that can impact your students and what that can mean for your students.
Hey, Sarah, before you move on, if you go back a
Yeah.
slide, we do something like this with kids every year, and I find it always so interesting because kids create their own map, right? Their own identity map, and then you kind of get to see like the pieces that they really identify, like what makes them who they are, right? Like, and it's always just like a little peek inside these humans who we care for during the day. I really enjoy it.
Thank you, Chris. That's a good observation, and it's worth noting. Thank you. Okay, so when we don't see different identities represented authentically, we see a tendency toward othering. And othering is when we begin to attribute negative characteristics to groups or people who are separate from us. And it sort of creates in us an us versus them thinking and treatment. I'm sure you've seen this recently at school board meetings, unfortunately, where various groups are pitted against one another. Kind of, again, think about this and reflect on this, jot it on a piece of paper, put that word othering on your paper, and think about what that looks like and where else you might have seen that other than, unfortunately, other than at school board meetings. And then we'll talk about the antidote to that othering. Inclusivity. So as leaders, we need to be aware of the inner work that requires us to address our own biases and prejudices. And when we do that, that helps us to really combat that othering mentality. We don't want to be in an us versus them mentality, in an othering mentality. We want to create an inclusive community. And I think, as Chris pointed out earlier, knowing your students and being aware of how they see themselves and their identity is a great way to connect with them, and to help to ensure that inclusive community. Okay, Annalise, go ahead. I hope I'm giving you enough time to read too, as we're putting slides up and also talking at the same time. All right, so we want to think about leading with empathy and compassion. Part of leading with empathy and compassion is being able to experience and understand what others feel. And the question is, how do we do that while also maintaining clear discernment with our own feelings and our own perspective? Pausing, being reflective, and asking yourself what will truly serve. And that's why we continue to encourage you to do that. Just if you have to turn away from the screen for a minute to take a note, it's okay to do that. We're recording and you'll be able to watch this again later. So it's all right to take a moment to do that. Yeah, and finally, before I hand off to Keturah, I just want to leave you with 3 ways to support healing. And those 3 ways are in conversation, in work and play, and every day. So again, part of social awareness is supporting healing. And we want to ask when, what, and why. And I'm just going to pause one more time. I know that you can't write in the chat, but even if you want to put it in the Q&A, what is one way that you can commit to supporting healing, and what's maybe one way that you find that maybe it's the most natural way for you to support healing? So on that idea, I'm going to hand it to Keturah. Thank you.
Thank
Before
you,
before we
Sarah.
pick up though, I want to lift up Mike Ward from the Q&A for just a quick second. He was mentioning the bargaining table as a place where we really kind of other one another, and I was kind of reflecting on districts that are moving towards interest-based bargaining to really, you move towards it, you move away from it, you move towards it again to try to like find those commonalities and build from there. Thanks, Mike.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. And it's kind of like apropos because the collective bargaining conference is happening next week. And I know at least one presenter who will be talking about that very thing. So it's all connected. As I move into talking about relationship skills. This is a very important skill for any leader to understand if they want to maintain healthy and supportive relationships. And we'll talk about kind of, the different types of relationships we see. In the workplaces. It is important if they want to navigate settings with diverse groups and to be transformational and not transactional. So in this discussion, we'll be focusing, as Sarah identified, in level 1 and level 2, in our progression levels, foundational and mobilizing and power building. And specifically learn how to practice clear and honest communication and collaborate towards a shared vision. Again, there's so much in each of these competency themes, and we really are only giving you just small bites, if you will. So we hope you stay curious and learn more about the competencies and continue to dig in deeper on your own time. So I mentioned transactional and transformational relationships, and I won't go through all of these um, attributes that are listed on the slide, but I do want to kind of highlight for you that when we talk about transactional, it's usually, just one-sided. It is, what is it that I need? What is it that you're giving? And unlike transformational relationship, it lacks the intimacy, if you will, or the focus on the person and not the task. And so when we talk about the differences between the two, are there times that you're going to have a transactional relationship? Yes, but in the context of leadership development and growing these skills, then we encourage you to be transformational with your relationships, to pay attention to the person, to allow that to be your focus. And so both can achieve the same results, but the way to get there is vastly different. As I said before, sometimes you do need both, but in deepening relationships and building trust, especially among your team, being transformational can spur innovation and creativity, right? Your attitude is different when you're coming to work just to perform a task versus contributing. Annalise mentioned the importance of that sense of belonging. When that is created, the autonomy to do your work, there's much more investment in the individual to spur those types of attributes. So how we get to transformational relationships takes both time and work. An assumption of transformational relationships is that there is open and honest communication between individuals. And that is an assumption, and it's not true, right? And so we'll now look at a form of open and honest communication and how we might move closer, because we have to be intentional in creating that type of communication. So as I said before, part of having a quality relationship is practicing the clear and honest communication. And one strategy to do that is through nonviolent communication. This is something that was created by Marshall Rosenberg, and who was motivated by the work of Mahatma Gandhi. So there are 4 components to the NVC model, the nonviolent communication model. The 4 components are identified here, 1 being observation, 2 feeling, being able to experience the emotion and the physical sensation in each moment, and then distinguishing between those feelings from thoughts is an essential step that I do want to highlight, and we'll practice that a little bit. Then identifying the needs, right? We all have needs and values. How do we make sure that we're not just focusing on our needs, but we're also able to identify the needs of the other person as well? And as I think Sarah mentioned it before, that's where we get into the empathy, right? And then request. It is vital that when we are using the nonviolent communication model, that we are making our request, 1, in a clear manner, and 2, in an honest matter, that we're not making a request that we believe somebody else wants to hear, but we're making the request and presenting that request in a way that really helps to transform the relationship. So there are 2 parts to this type of communication. 1, as we mentioned before, empathy, where we're receiving from the heart, right? We talked about how like the role that our mind plays in this, but it's not absent from the heart. And that's how we are really able to connect with others and share some of those experiences in a richer way. And then the honesty given from the heart has its root in honesty. So we want to make sure that we're learning how to communicate in a way that really focuses on our heart. Okay. So an example, when I see that whatever is happening, I feel, so what is it that you're feeling in that moment? Because my need for blank is or is not met. Would you be willing to do X? So that is the request. That's where the request comes in. So we will encourage you. Again, we know that you're having to use the Q&A, and Chris, by all means, if someone shares something, please let us know so we can lift it up for the whole group. But we do want to ask you to practice in the Q&A. So I would say here, when I see that the cabinet door is left open, I feel frustrated because my need for safety is not being met. And would you be willing to double check to make sure the cabinet door is closed when you take something out? And so the focus again is what is it that I'm clearly stating that I'm observing that the cabinet door has been left open. How does that make me feel, and why? That need is really like, why do I feel that way? And getting to the root of that helps us make a clear request of the individual. Okay. So let's take this all together, whether it's looking at how you are showing up in your relationships or practicing open and honest communication. Time and focus need to be given to relationships, building skills. That's what we're talking about. From there, part of the work of a leader is understanding how to support, how to nudge and challenge others, not to get something done, but to be their best. And we do that using the acronym COACH. Okay. So we have the care about, remember we said the people, when we talk about transformational relationships, that's the priority, the people. Organize the people around that. We like to say that sweet spot. Align them around the mission and the values and their work as a team. Challenge them to reach their full potential, and then help them So here are some practices that you can do. We encourage you to do this in real time as you explore these practices that are listed on the slide. Think about which of these you can commit to. And again, we know that reflection is one of the hallmarks of the leadership competency framework. So as you're thinking about which of these you can commit to, we would encourage you to actually record it, either write it down, put it in the Q&A, so that that will help reinforce it for you. And it does require a mind shift around looking for assets and positive. So Brandy is going to lead us into responsible decision making.
Nice. So responsible decision making is the last competency we'll be talking about today. And responsible decision making really is about making caring and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions across diverse situations. As a coach, your role is to help others make these decisions and make these choices and behave ethically and responsibly, and to create these creative solutions, sometimes they're really complex problems. So we're going to be working, our next couple slides, we'll be thinking about how we can work towards engaging in healing work and finding that mental balance that allows us to make these responsible decisions in a very safe environment. And that's, safe, I mean emotionally safe, right? We want to put our heart into all of our decisions, as well as we wanted to do all of the previous competencies with our heart. So oftentimes I think we think about our analytical brain being the one that makes the decisions, but there is a role for your right brain to play in decision making too. All right, so one of the things that needs to happen in responsible decision making is that we need to have clear boundaries, and these boundaries allow us the space and the mindset to make decisions that we feel are best. And so many of us, like, boundaries are a challenge. I can speak personally to that. I was a kindergarten teacher, and there's no boundaries in kindergarten classes. And I have a daughter who also has a hard time respecting boundaries as well. So for me, this is a particular challenge. But just think about these things listed on the slide. Are these things that you might need to work on? Are you holding compassionate boundaries for yourself? Are you saying yes when maybe you shouldn't? Are you taking on priorities that are other people's priorities and it's hurting you to achieve or reach your priorities? Are we neglecting our work? Are we suffering physically? Do we have symptoms of stress like sleep, lack of sleep? Are we tired a lot? Are we just feeling a lot of anxiety and stress? Or, in worst case scenario, are we accepting abuse in our relationships? So if you have something to write on, or if you are just wanting to think through this, or post in the Q&A, you might want to really think about how do you hold compassionate boundaries for yourself? And if you don't, maybe you have some ideas, just one idea really, on how you might start with that strategy. So after, you've kind of taken a look at your boundary setting as the foundation for having the space and the energy to move forward with some decisions, you're going to want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And taking care of yourself is has these different domains. There's lots of versions of this on the internet, and we talked a little bit more deeply about this in our previous webinar in part 1. but you want to make sure that you have care for yourself in all of these domains, not get out of balance or out of skew. And as a coach, you might even want to share this with people you're working with and make sure that they are setting boundaries and they also have a balanced life for wellness, and they're not just only focusing on their physical. I know people who do that, like exercise is the one solution for everything for them. And when you dig a little deeper with them, you realize that there are other pieces of their life that really are not getting any attention at all. So part of making good, compassionate, caring decisions is also making sure you're balanced in these things too. On the next slide, we have a short video to share with you from Shelley. I cannot pronounce her last name, but Annalise is going to reshare and show the video in a minute.
Is the ability to identify when I am stressed, to really identify the onset of this like physiological, biological feeling in my body. And once I sense, for me, it's that knot in my stomach, that increased heart rate, the closing of my throat, that's how it shows up for me. I can default, right? That's the trainability. I default into a pause, a mindful pause, as opposed to shutting down and being reactionary, right? So now I can choose to respond versus react. And when I'm reactionary, it could possibly be harmful to myself. It could be harmful to other people. So to get to this default mode, right, I needed to have this reminder in a formalized plan. And so writing it down and putting it in your junk drawer or under a stack of mail is not useful. What needs to happen is that this plan needs to be then shared with other individuals in a communal setting, because self-care is not an individualistic pursuit, it's a communal pursuit. I know that the word self is in there, and so it implies it's individualistic, but really it isn't, because we need to rely on each other to be able to, number one, hold each other accountable, to make sure that we are actually doing what we say we want to do or intend to do, what our intentionality is, to use Amishi's word. And the other thing is that communities help us remove obstacles that are in our way, because the systems that have been built in this world sometimes don't work in our favor, right? So if you're a single mother, for example, and you have things that are on your self-care plan list that you can never get to because you don't have a babysitter, or you don't have the financial means to do that, for example, then you are going to need to rely on other people in your community to assist, to help remove those obstacles. And so that's the beautiful kind of mutuality, if you will, mutual aid nature of creating something that is formalized, communicating it, sharing it with a circle of influence or community of care that becomes a safety net. And suddenly it doesn't become this like lonely pursuit of wellness, this lonely pursuit of resilience, but rather, again, thinking about service, finding the helpers. Suddenly you are reaching out to create a web of a social network of support.
So for me, that idea of self-care as a communal practice really resonated with me. And I see myself having maybe possibly even some challenges around that, because I tend to be somebody who doesn't want to bother people with my issues or my problems. I don't know if that resonates with you that way or not. We do have Felicia, who has her hand up. So Felicia, I'm going to give you a chance to ask questions. And if anybody else wants to ask questions, feel free to raise your hand. Felicia, go ahead. You need to unmute. Alicia, I'll try again in a minute. Denise, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
No, I accidentally raised my hand? Sorry. Sorry. I was looking for a place to unmute and I couldn't find it. So
Okay,
thanks.
all right. Alicia, do you have a question? If you remember what it is or you want to share it later, just raise your hand back up, all right? So our next slide is that idea of self-care as this communal pursuit. And the question here is, to really reflect on how you think of self-care. Is it like me, where it's just like all on me to like be the best possible human being I can be? Or do you see it? Can you see it in a different frame, that it is actually something that we need others for, that we can share in? And this quote here, self-care and healing and attention to the body and the spiritual dimension, all of this is now part of a radical social justice struggles. And that's Angela Davis. So to support healing and responsible decision-making for yourself, some good ways to do that, before you step out to change the world and make all of your decisions. You can just wash your hands and take 3 deep breaths, and even just paying attention to how that water feels on your hands. Try changing the temperature, maybe make it nice and warm and soothing, or maybe you're tired, turn it on cold and wake yourself up and immerse yourself just in that act of washing your hands. And that can help you symbolically, as well as, really just kind of washing things away and letting go of things. Another thing you can try to do is, as you're logging into your computer, especially if you have like an NEA password that is 13 characters long, you have a really great opportunity to really notice the rhythm of your typing and your login and your password. Taking a deep breath before and after is always a good idea. And before you leave at the end of the day, I like this one, just kind of standing in the doorway and being grateful for 1 or 3 things, right? Just what went well today? What am I grateful for in this space? As kind of a closure. This helps you walk away from that space and then enter into your next place of being, which may be home, maybe your car, but those transitional moments are a great time to take a mindful pause, practice gratitude. Maybe you need to practice letting go, breathing. I think that really helps ground you into the next phase, the next space you're going to be in, and keeps your mind clearer, so that when you do have to make decisions, your mindset is ready for that. Sarah is going to talk to us about some NEA resources that will continue you on your journey.
Absolutely. And I just want to invite any of the panelists to jump in at any point if you want to add anything. So our first resource here is at nea.org/SEL. And if you click on that link, or if you type in that link, it's an easy one to type in, nice and short. There are quite a few resources there that I just want to quickly highlight. One, the NEA has quite a grouping, a compilation of excellent courses, independent learning courses that you can check out, recorded webinars, trainings on the importance of self-care, lots of resources that you can access at any time whenever you have time to do that. Also, I want to point out that you can join one of the NEA Ed communities. There is a mindful educators group that you can connect with. So if you're ever feeling like you need to connect with somebody else, share ideas, bounce things off somebody else, there are lots of other people out there who are doing the work that you're doing and can relate to you in a really deep way. And you can reach them through the NEA Ed communities. Okay. Also, we want to remind you again that you are the leaders. Leadership starts with you. And there are several things that you can do to continue in your leadership journey. If you click on that, I keep saying click on the link and you're looking at a screen. Don't try to click on the link. You'll be frustrated. If you go to that link, nea.org/leadership development, you'll see the core competencies. Brandy posted in the chat earlier where you can go and download a copy of that. You can request it through that site. And there are self-assessments and online courses that you can engage with. And we really just invite you to integrate leadership development into all aspects of your work. And kind of on that line, we want to open a conversation, which might be a little bit tricky when we don't have the chat going, but I invite you again to use the Q&A if you want to. If you would like to say something and participate in this conversation, please raise your hand in the chat, and I know Brandy will be happy to unmute and invite you to use the microphone if you prefer to talk to us. But leadership development work is healing work.
And I pause because Felicia has her hand up.
Yes.
Okay. Felicia, you just need to unmute.
I'm sorry, I'm technologically challenged. I thought that I had it lowered. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You don't need to apologize. We love hearing from you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If you change your mind and you want to say something, please do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So we've been speaking this evening about these SCI competencies and leadership competencies. Can you see those as being part of your healing and well-being work? And if so, how? And what themes this evening resonated with you? If you want to unmute, if you want to write in the Q&A, I know it's a little bit, maybe a little awkward, but we're going to make the best of it. Or if you just want to write down notes. Sometimes just I think the physical tactile act of writing something on a piece of paper helps me kind of ingrain that into my own brain and into my own heart.
And Sarah, if I could just pause, I want to ask, since we do have Christine still with us, Christine, just because of your leadership journey, if there's anything you want to reflect on or share in terms of the leadership competencies as being part of that journey, or the social emotional intelligence competency and how that resonated with you and why. I'd love to hear a little bit from you in this space as well.
Great, thank you. As I was listening, and of course, part of this is thinking about our own growth in this journey of leadership, and of course, looking at the leadership competencies and going across helps us to really determine our growth and kind of set a matrix of self-reflection in our journey. I will tell you, as I listened about the I to the we, and how we need to consider ourselves as visionary and compassionate leaders in this work, and that leadership is not about a title, but it's about us standing up, doing the work that we know needs to be done, but really making sure we take time out, as the title says, to put our own oxygen mask on first, right? To make sure that we are taking time out for self-care, that we are willing to say no. No is a full sentence, and it's okay to say no, to take care of our own physical, social, emotional, and spiritual needs, and to protect our boundaries. And the thing that I lifted up on my own self from this was that, even though, like you said, it's self-care, we don't have to do it by ourselves, that we should learn to rely on our supports. And I know a lot of us, that's really hard to do. I heard someone share that sometimes they feel like they're imposing on others when we ask for help. But I think I think the message here is that it is okay, and almost to the point that it is necessary, to make sure we are including others in our journey to protect ourselves, as we would be willing to help protect others, so that it's okay to ask for help. And finally, before we close, I just want to say thank you for those resources. As soon as we're done, I'm going to go and check out the NEA.org SEL page, and I'm going to share that with some of my colleagues, friends, and families, because as we are dealing with a lot of stressors ourselves in our work as educators, as leaders, as advocates, using these SEL resources is going to be helpful in our journey. So thank you for allowing me to share.
Beautiful. Thank you, Annalise. I was just working on posting an answer to a question in the chat. Somebody's looking for a link to the prior session to the slide deck. Brandy did create a link exactly for making a copy. For some reason, I put it in there and it's not, there we go. Send. I got it. Okay, so if you're looking for a copy of the last session, putting on your own oxygen mask part 1, if you check out David Bradley's question in the Q&A, there is a bit.ly post there that you can use to make a copy of it.
Yeah, and Sarah Brandy also posted it for everybody in the chat.
Thank you. And it's in the chat too,
yeah.
which makes perfect sense. All right, so we want to kind of conclude this evening by asking, the second link is hot off the press. We want to conclude this evening by asking you just to share kind of how you're feeling. And maybe that's a little bit hopefully, as you have been listening tonight, you might feel excited and in anticipation, whatever that is. If you can go to that Q&A and just take a moment to share how you're feeling. I know that wheel is really tiny. If I post that link in the chat, Brandy, can you repost it?
Yep.
Thank you. All right. So how are you feeling? And you can post that in the Q&A if if you want to do that. And again, I just want to open it one more time. We have a minute left here. We really respect and value your time, but if you have questions, please raise your hand. Write them in the chat. We want to take those from you.
Mike Ward is feeling happy.
Yay.
Janelle Hartman is feeling optimistic as I continue to grow my SEL toolbox. Thank you for your time and sharing the information with us. Let's see, Marjorie Doss says, I'm feeling inspired to share some of the resources you shared with us with others in my association. Oh, that just makes me happy, doesn't it? Taking care of each other there, yeah. Kelly Bradley is happy, accepted, and thankful. Rachel is feeling valued from the NEA. Sherry Collins says, thank you. Great webinar with an exclamation mark. Pamela West says, I feel very inspired. Lori Dodson, thank you. Thankful for being part of such an organization that looks at the whole person and how we are connected to one another. Yeah, snaps to that. Olivia Flake says, feeling comforted and affirmed with information shared. Thank you. Courtney's feeling inspired and hopeful. Our friend Anne Marie Borders, Sarah, says, I really like the real-time gratitude slide. What a great way to form a habit of being grateful. I'm looking forward to starting that on a more regular basis and sharing it with my colleagues. Thank you for all of your hard work. Kamisha Williams, I'm sorry if I've did your name wrong there. I am also excited about sharing the NEA resources. David Bradley, appreciate your time. Faith, relieved to know that there is no, relieved to know that no is a full sentence. Oh my gosh, I had to read that twice, Felicia. It is a full sentence. My wife is always telling me, like, you don't need to explain yourself.
She's probably just wants you to be quiet, Chris.
Oh, I maybe, should I stop? There's another like 10.
You know.
Maybe this is a good time to be done. But thank you. I also want to say I really appreciate the moments that we can reflect on our own practices, how we think about ourselves, how we think about how we think, and how we position ourselves in relationships to other people, and how we interact with the other humans around us.
Thank you for showing up tonight for yourself and for all of the people you are going to go and lead.